honorable official of Nusa Tenggara University, distinguished speakers and presenters, and also participants. As you can see from the schedule that our second keynote speaker today is Dr. Paul Robertson. For us, this is the second time Dr. Paul takes part in this conference since it started last year. And for those who first joins this conference this year, I would like to give brief introduction about our second keynote speaker. Dr. Paul Robertson is the founder of the Asian EFL Journal. One of the journal facilitated this conference 10 best articles. And also, Dr. Paul has involved in the development of a number of journals, reputable journals. Few that can be mentioned is the Linguistic Journal, English as International Journal, TESOL International Journal, and also Asian EFP Journal. Dr. Paul, in fact, is the CEO of this company that manages all those journals that I mentioned. And for those who are willing or have the interest to develop their career in writing, all those journals are listed in Scopus plus other known indexes. Without further ado, I will give the time to Dr. Paul, who will be discussing about publishing issues and also as well as his concern and thoughts on the use of artificial intelligence and the impact on SLA profession. Dr. Paul, I'm honored to welcome you to deliver your presentation.
Yeah, hi Linda, thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, Dr. Paul.
Okay, I'm a complete novice to this. I've managed to avoid doing Zooms for the last year. So this is my first attempt. So if I press the wrong button, you'll forgive me. And hi, you've got a very big audience, I see, a very young looking audience. I'm just looking across the screens. I guess some are students and some are academics. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, indeed. They are first year students, third grade year students, and also academics and professions.
Okay, and to all your audience, good morning. You'll notice a difference between me and Rob Dickey. Now, Rob's about 20 years younger and has no hair. So there you go. This is a fascinating thing. Well, maybe not 20 years younger, but he's younger. And thanks to the virus, I haven't had a haircut all year. Can you believe? So I'm looking like one of the Beatles from 1960s. Long hair. All right. Now, there's two parts to the talk. The first part, I just want to delve into AI. But before I delve into that, let me just, Rob Dickey and I always take issues. I'm not a fan of Zoom, and I think COVID has taught us a lesson, and thank God the vaccine is imminent. I mean, the vaccine will be coming out in December across the US. I think education is best done in the classroom with a teacher, face to face, and I think we lose a lot by not being in a room together where we share questions, thoughts, and feelings. I think we've learned from the virus. We've done well, actually. We've done very well. But next year, Rob thinks 2 years. I think very quickly next year we will be back to some degree in the classroom. I certainly hope so. I know here in the Philippines, which is where I'm talking from, Rob's in South Korea. I'm in the Philippines. We're moving back into school in January, not full time. Universities will be back face to face. I'm just going to spend 10 minutes talking about something that concerns me. Let me jump back to the 1990s. I'll tell you how the journals came about. In 1997, I had this thought that all academic journals were not online and you had to pay for them. So I had this idea that the future of journals is open access free. And so I started back in 1999. the Asian AFL Journal, online, open access and free. And there we have the start of the industry, and now there are many open access journals which you can go to online. That was sort of back in 1999 when I started the ball rolling, and now I have this thought that our profession, we've just come over the COVID, the drama of COVID-19, but I think the next big issue is AI. So I've written AI 2030. Are we ready? And what I mean to say here is that will artificial intelligence take our place? I think there's good news. Let me just read this for you. AI and our profession. AI is a double-edged sword. It has become ubiquitous and invaded all aspects of our life. In the field of translation, for instance, there are some high-quality translation tools such as Robertson, Google, Glosby. Not only this, but the quality is improving, and it seems that these devices are becoming more intelligent. Without a doubt, AI will have an adverse impact on SLA, second language acquisition. This is our profession. There are plenty of software and online tools that aim to self-guide learners in carrying out complicated tasks without the teacher's interference, such as the writing tutor, in which students can produce, edit, and write a final draft of different essay genres. There is also a software called Intelligent Tutor, which diagnoses errors in writing and proved to be efficient at a high rate. Also, Grammarly is such an amazing tool for proofreading written texts. Perhaps these emerging tools might greatly affect employability in the very upcoming years. There are many language learning chatbot apps such as Duolingo, Mondly, Andy, to name but a few. Before COVID, I was in China. Already China has developed AI teachers who respond to emotions and communicate in fluent English, have an active vocabulary of about 7,000, which is the basic words that you need to speak English. And they have a Princess Leia look, for those of you who have seen Star Wars. So I think we have next steps, and obviously Rob will help me on this. I think we need leading new research journals to discuss where the next 10 years are going. And I think we need international conferences focused on our profession, second language acquisition, and the incoming AI. So here are my questions, just for get us thinking. In 2030, what will the role of the academic teacher, researcher be? Assistant to AI? Or AI assists the teacher? Or AI replaces the teacher? Or AI opens up far more research opportunities to academia? Or AI creates far more teaching positions in universities? Academic specializations in AI SLA? Will the humans be superimposed to real life scenarios? How will the introduction of AI and SLA impact higher ed? Are we ready? That was the cry about COVID. Are we ready? No, we weren't. Consider most global governments had planned for a pandemic, and when one came, the plans all failed. So 3, will online English, human teacher to student, survive, or will AI teachers be supported by humans? These are the questions. And number 4, which worries me, when AI comes, will the third world, less privileged students be left behind? I think the answer is a resounding yes. 3 steps that we're taking already. I'm thinking 10 years ahead. We're setting up something called TESOL Global, the World TESOL Organization, which I think can be a leader in where we are going. I would like to see more conferences turn their full attention to this topic. And obviously, I'd like to see more open access academic journals. Now, how do I get out of this screen? Okay. So that's just a few thoughts. I mean, it's probably 10 years away, but as I said, in Shanghai, and I have seen it with my own eyes. Jack Ma is developing hologram teachers. So where will that go in 10 years? We need to be ready. In Singapore also, there's a similar company to Jack Ma's company in Shanghai, also doing a very similar job of preparing a Princess Leia type teacher. And these holograms can actually, they look at you, they talk to you, and they can assess your emotions, and they can say, oh, Paul, I can see you don't understand what I'm saying, or I can see that you're stressed. So they're fairly advanced. So maybe over the next few years, we can start turning our minds to, I think, an exciting future in our profession. All right, but that was just by the way. Now, what I want to do is talk about publishing, which is probably more important to you guys. Okay, so everybody can see this, can they?
Yes, it's
Okay.
on the screen.
All right, so as I said, back in the 1990s, it was 1997, 1998, I wrote a 7,000 word paper, which I sent to a journal, my first attempt to be published. And believe it or not, I thought it was a great paper, best paper in the world. 2 weeks later, I received the rejection notice, the horrible, thank you for your paper, it has been rejected. No more information. It's pretty depressing when you get that, especially with no help, no information. So I was so angry, as opposed to depressed. I built my own journal the same day. So in one day, the Asian EFL journal was born from nothing to a journal in one day. That goes back to the late 1990s. So that's how my publishing career began, to publish myself. And since then, you can see from the screen, there's the Asian ESP journal, a Q2, the TESOL International Journal, a Q2, the Asian EFL journal, which is probably the very longest serving journal, Q2. The linguistics journal is into Scopus recently. I don't know the Q score. English International Language Journal is in Scopus with a Q3. And an up-and-coming journal with a brilliant chief editor, whose name is Dr. Rob Dickey, is the International Journal Law, Language and Discourse. And we expect next year that we can get that into the indexes. I mentioned to you that I was rejected back in 1997, and it's actually quite a shock. It's quite a shock. You do a lot of work, you put in hours and hours, maybe 20, 30, 40 hours writing a paper. And within a week, within a day, you get an email back saying, thank you for your paper, you're rejected. So let me just sort of guide you through some of the reasons that our editors, I think we've got about 400 or 500 editors across the journal group. Reasons for rejection. Number one, surprisingly, English. Grammar, sentence structure, spelling. Believe it or not, too many papers come, and I hate to sound vindictive, but the English is just shocking. And so no editor is going to read a paper. It doesn't matter how good, how unique the paper, if in the abstract you're struggling with the grammar. So number one, maybe get a friend, get an editor, get a professional editor to review your paper so that the English is good English, because remember, the people that read your papers are English experts. And number two, a reason, sometimes the submission is not within the scope. Sometimes, for example, we receive articles on the life and times of William Shakespeare. Well, you can imagine that has nothing to do with second language acquisition, so to speak. Number three, the outdated literature index. Not too often these days. I mean, nowadays with the internet and online journals, etc. The majority of papers are looking at literature from the last decade, even back to the year 2000. The occasional research paper sends a lot of references from the 1990s and 1980s. Well, that's just too old, too far out. Unless there's something special from the 1990s, you know, for example, one of Professor Ellis's pronouncements, don't go back that far. Number 4, the key findings of the research is not linked to the literature, right? Number 5, now this is a big one. This is really important. The research adds nothing new to the previous published research. So if you're going to write a paper, don't concentrate on the known knowns, refer to them. But why are you writing your paper? Have you found a gap? Have you found a gap in the previous research? Have you found something that you think is incorrect? So obviously you refer to the previous research, but you might want to just distinguish it. For example, you can say, for example, in 2000, Robertson and Ellis said this, but they overlooked the following factors. For example, don't write something that we already know. That will get rejected. There has to be a gap. You have to find a gap, and believe it, there are gaps everywhere in our field of language research. Okay, no, that was my 10-year-old checking if she can have the computer. Number 6, the research is focus. Just moving my screen. Yeah, the research question loses focus, or the conclusions are not consistent with the research question. For example, you pose a research question and too many papers, the conclusion completely ignores what the research question was. Here is a list from editors, sample of editors' comments. This came from one paper. It was a good paper from the Middle East, a 7,000-word paper from a professor. The editor noted, number 1, the topic is outdated and does not contribute to new pedagogical trends in EFL context and second language acquisition. 2, the author discussed instructions, use of scaffolding activities, and learning from peers in the abstract and conclusion, but they were not mentioned neither in the literature review nor in the discussion. This paper, number 3, the aspect hypothesis theory is outdated. Briefly, the paper could have benefited from new research instruments and new theories to meet up with current methodological and pedagogical EFL issues. 4, the study does not really inform language teachers about pedagogical practices that could enhance past tense acquisition by, in this case, it was Middle East EFL learners. The implications of this study are not really solid, and as noted, the conclusion introduced a brand new topic. Finally, number 7, the author could have compared 2 teaching methodologies in order to investigate which one has helped past tense acquisition. So there's the sort of thing that editors look for and they report on. Let's come down to, it's important for you to know, once you write your paper and you submit it, you need to know, I think it's a good idea to know what happens once you send it. So number 1, you write a paper and you submit it to, let's say, the Asian EFL Journal via email. Number 2, the first thing that happens is you get an automated response. Simply says, we've received your paper. And if you don't receive that, then something has gone wrong in the system. Number 3, then one of the administrative staff then record the information from the paper. Then it moves to a preliminary, your paper moves to preliminary review if the paper falls within the scope of the Asian EFL Journal.
So if it's not within the scope, it's rejected straight out. Number 6, if it's within the scope, the paper then goes to the chief editor, which is, in this case, we had different chief editors on every journal. So in this case, the Asian Airfield Journal is Professor John Adamson, who's been the chief editor for maybe 20 years. The journal chief editor makes a preliminary determination. A, do we accept it for further review? B, suggest an appropriate other journal? Or C, do we reject it and give suggestions to the author? If we accept for review, 8.1, we select the appropriate journal associate editor. We have teams, we have many teams. So under the chief editor and many, many teams of associate editors who have teams of 4 editors under them. And they all specialize in different areas. So the chief editor selects the appropriate journal associate editor to handle the paper. Then that editor, he reviews the paper and sends it to 2 of his team for the blind review. Wow, what happened there? My screen disappeared. Where are we? Oh, there we go. I'm back again. That was exciting. Then the editors, 8.3, the editors and the associate editor work with the author. They give suggestions and might ask for reviews, rewrites, etc. And then eventually, 8.4, the paper's either accepted for publishing or just doesn't make the grade. Then 8.5, the associate editor assimilates the edition. And then the edition goes to the web division who prepare it for publication online. Okay, so that's kind of, you can see it's a complex path, and papers do get, I mean, you move from the chief editor, it's actually 4 editors looking at the paper. Okay, we can probably scroll down to the next page. Oh, let's go back. Up one. Okay, here where it says fact. This is the, I think this is the tragedy of our profession. I think Rob Dickey will agree with me. Our profession is growing. More and more and more students becoming teachers, moving into academia. It's a huge profession. If we go across the world, I believe there's like 1.75 billion language learners. A lot of them are in universities. So it's a sad fact that the law of supply and demand, Adam Smith applies now. The demand for publishing is far, far greater than the journal supply. There are just not enough journals out there to handle the vast volumes of papers you guys are writing, which in our case, this is just a general figure, in our case, our acceptance for publishing is around the 12% mark. The Asian AFL Journal is actually at about 6%. The TESOL International Journal is about 9%. The English International Journal is about 14%. So 12% is kind of a benchmark. So you can see the rejection rate, sadly, is very high. The daughter really wants her computer, but she can't have it. So there you go. In our case, in our journal case, we could say 1 in 12, 1 in 15 papers will make the cut. Hence me saying, I think Rob agreeing, we need far more academic journals. We really do. But it's complex. It's very complex to set them up. I mean, there are companies such as the company I'm with, Site Australia. We have all these journals, and there's a huge team involved in publishing. But if you have like a society group, it's very hard. These are volunteers, and it's very expensive to run journals. So as I mentioned back in my AI talk, I'm hoping we can find ways to bring new indexed journals to the authors. I just want to give you a few notes on Scopus. Scopus, if we could go down to that page. Now, obviously, it's important for you to be published, whether it be in Scopus or ISI. I think they're two of the indexes that are important for you. So what you have to notice or note, Scopus is an independent third-party company. So Scopus index some journals after an intensive review. So our group of journals have gone through the review over the years, and they've been indexed by Scopus. As I said, there are some Q2s, and we do talk to Scopus. We know that a couple of those will be at Q1 into the new year. But number three is important to all your academics, I think. Just because you get published in a Scopus journal doesn't mean that Scopus, the company, which I think is based in the USA, is going to index your particular article. That's purely up to Scopus, not up to the Scopus-based journal. So we often get a letter or an email from an author saying, well, my paper was published in the linguistics journal 6 months ago, but Scopus didn't index it. That's something beyond our control. You can imagine Scopus has got millions and millions and millions of articles every year, and I think they just cannot index them all. The only way to get indexed, from what I hear from my managing director, is if you can find someone inside Scopus and write to them saying, my article was published in the Asian FL Journal, for example, and can it be indexed individually by you? Our industries attract, sadly, a lot of predatory journals. Too many, far too many. And I've just got the title, Known Scams. This is where you guys have got to be careful. Not only with publishing, but conferences. There are just so many scam conferences out there. You do have to be careful. It's big business making money out of conferences that don't exist, I hate to say. So, known scams, number one, journals appearing to be the real journal, but are fake copies. Let me give you an example that's happened to us. The AsianESPjournal.com, it's one of our Q2 journals. There's a ghost journal, the AsianESPjournal-CN.com, pretending to be us and charging fees. So this is what I mean. Be careful before you send your paper to a journal. Make sure it's not a scam, and it's very common for scams to have a very similar name to the original journal. Sad to say, but maybe that's where we are these days. I've got a note here, the rejection notice. We've talked about the rejection notice, but I didn't write any notes about it. You can see it's completely blank. Okay, we can go back up. The rejection notice, look, don't be depressed or distressed if you get a rejection notice. Hopefully the editor has given you some good guidelines on what to do. And remember, I have to say this, you know that our acceptance rate is around the 12-15% mark, which means that some very good papers just don't make the cut. Sad but true. So you might write a very good paper, but just didn't make the cut. A rejection notice has different impacts. I know, for example, from the research out of Japan, if a Japanese author gets a rejection notice, they take it very, very personally, and they will never write to that journal company again. It's a terrible thing. It's like a loss of face in Japan to receive a rejection notice. But as I mentioned, the supply of journals and the demand is 30, 40 times greater than what's available. That's a sad fact of life. But let's go back to the original point. If you find a gap in the previous research and you concentrate on that gap, you have a very good chance of getting published. If you write an article, for example, that says, well, Dickey said this and I agree with him, and Robertson said this and I agree with him, and here's my findings from a limited research of 30 students in Kupang, it's probably a great paper, but it's not going to make the cut. All right, I'm just looking. I think that's about it. Let me just scroll down. I'll just show you something interesting. I mentioned before that we're opening the World TESOL organization, and here's our 4 leading figures who are going to be setting. It's going to be a global organization, free for everybody, and I'm still planning how we bring this all together with new journals. Professor Rod Ellis is going to be at the top of the tree, and he'll be supported by Dr. Beata Webb from Australia, Dr. Ludmila Bolsonovskaya from Russia, and a lady you might know. She's quite famous in Kupang and probably needs no introduction, Santry. So these are going to be our top 4 executives. And down below you can see my managing editor, Dr. Ramon Medriano, who is my right hand. And he's the chap, if you need information, you just write to him. All right, I think there's nothing under that. I think that's the end of the page. Oh, okay. No, we can come to this one. Let me just here's a rejection notice that came in last night. Let me just read it to you. Thank you very much for submitting your manuscript to the Asian ESP Journal. We have just completed the initial screening of it. The topic is interesting and within the scope of the journal. However, we will not be able to send it out for full review for a couple of reasons. First, the language of the text needs to be edited carefully by a professional editor if possible. There are various grammar and punctuation mistakes that need to be corrected. Remember, the readers and reviewers of the Asian ESP Journal are language experts who would pay close attention to the use of language. Secondly, the submission guidelines on the journal page clearly indicate that papers may be up to 7,000 words, including references, but not appendices. Also, it is mentioned in our guidelines that authors are expected to make reference to at least 2 references from the Asian ESP Journal group. We also note that the literature review, results, discussion, and conclusion are in need of development. So there we have a editor's response to a paper which we can say was not very good at all, but the editor's given a fairly polite, please rewrite. So this is what I'm saying, you need to, the key thing here was that the English was so bad, I think the editor just had no time to read it. All right, I think I've got to stop talking, and Linda, I think that's about where I've come to.
Thank you, Dr. Poy. You're really ahead of time.
Are there any questions?
I have opened the chat box for your questions.
Are there questions down here?
Yes,
somewhere?
there's one question from Joshua Mesang, if you can see from the chat. Yes.
All right. Well, it's a good question, and obviously from an Indonesian point of view, I really can't answer that. But I believe, from what I hear that and what I've seen, there are Indonesians teaching across Greater Asia. So I think the opportunities are expanding. You mentioned a TESOL course. Some places want a TESOL course, but as you know, there's a lot of scam and fake TESOL courses out there, which you've got to avoid. Some of them are absolute garbage. So don't sign up and put your money into a TESOL course unless one of your colleagues recommends it. There are far too many scams in TESOL certificates. And when my voice went, I think I was saying that if we look at the Philippines situation, there are thousands and thousands of Philippine teachers now traveling the world to teach English. So I see no reason why that won't be the same across Indonesia. All right.
There's a second question from Erickson Saragi. If you can go scroll down to the chat book.
Oh, I see. Hello, Mr. Paul. What is the acceptance rate of the Asian ESP journal? It's about, Asian ESP journal is about 13, 14, 15% acceptance rate. So non-acceptance around about 70 to 80%. I think initially we could say 30 to 40% will get into review, right? But not all of those that go. The reviews are quite intense, where you're dealing with the editors, etc., etc. So the final acceptance rate is around 15%, which is pretty much similar across all our journals. And I suspect legitimate journals across the globe are in that vicinity. Some journals I know are 5%, some are 10, some are 20. So it depends. Let me give you an example. The other day being a month or two back, in one day we received 86 submissions for one journal. So just imagine that, 86 in one day. So obviously we can probably say 70, 75, if we just take statistics, are not going to make the cut. There is a huge demand to be published. Probably by the time I get off this, talking to you chaps, ladies and gentlemen, etc., we will have received probably 10 or 12 more submissions from across the globe. It's not just Asia. We're getting them from especially Eastern Europe now, and the old Russian Empire, because some of our journals have been indexed in ERIC. ERIC is an American index company which authors, academics across Turkey, Iraq, Iran, Russia, seek to be published in ERIC index journals. So here's someone asking about Scopus. All the papers or articles published in Scopus will be in So number one, as I mentioned, no. Scopus has their own internal indexing system, and that system is not available to anybody but those within Scopus. So you might be indexed within, let's say, the TESOL International Journal, but Scopus don't index you within the Scopus index as a pure article. Which to me suggests that soon I feel Scopus is going to probably charge significant fees. It's just my feeling. I can see where this is going. I think Scopus is going to charge significant fees to get yourself listed in Scopus. Not in a Scopus journal, but in Scopus. My guess is within a year, academics are going to be facing that. What is the difference between SCI and Scopus? Which one is the best? Everybody has a different opinion on this. I think it's just an individual choice. Some universities prefer SCI. Some are happy with Scopus. It's just two companies competing across the world. I guess I'm more biased towards Scopus because we do have a very good relationship with them, and it's very hard to get anything out of SCI. Hello, Mr. Paul. My question is, why demand for publishing is far greater than journal supply? Economics. Setting up a journal is very expensive. Running a journal, you saw the list, for example, you saw the list of all the things we do when we receive a paper. If you put a financial dollar value on all of that, it's incredibly expensive, thousands and thousands of dollars in commercial time. And this is a problem commercial companies are facing, like Springer, Elsevier. We all rely on volunteers. Let's face it, we rely on volunteers. Without volunteers, publishing would be extremely expensive. But luckily, and thanks to the profession across the world, there are a lot of volunteers. In our case, we try to give the volunteers 2 or 3 papers a year to review. Now that's a lot, because there's a lot of work. But all of our editors are happy doing 2 or 3, and I think also it looks good on their CV to show that they're an editor of one of the journals. I think I'm at the end of the list.
Yes, you made it to the end. But in terms of time, you still have roughly 2 minutes before we wrap up your session. If you have something you want to say in terms of encouraging the young writers, especially the students, to continue writing or to start writing.
So I think to all of the students out there who are going to publish, I think don't be put off by the fact that 15% get published. I mean, look at me. I mean, we all get rejected. Even look, Rob's been rejected. I've been rejected. It's very hard. But if you do your research, you find something you like, you find something you're really interested in, something that you think's important, research it. Maybe not just from for example, the Indonesian point of view or the Malaysian point of view. That's your starting point. How does your research come across the globe? What's happening in the Philippines? What's happening in Russia on that same research? Look at that point and see if you can find a gap. There's always a gap. Now, maybe it's, the research from, for example, the Philippines purely looked at the culture of the Philippines. So the gap is, well, the Indonesian culture is vastly different in education to Philippines. So you approach it from there. You can say, well, in the Philippines, Robertson said this, ABC, but in Indonesia, we have the following situation where we have different cultures from Bali to Kupang to Jakarta, which affects, and that's where your gap is. Just don't say Robertson said this and Dickey said this and I agree. It's nice if you say that, but say, however, the situation that they looked at is different, and point out what's different. And that will get you, instead of straight out rejection, that will get you into the editor. And once you're talking to an editor, you're halfway there. So do expect the occasional rejection, don't worry. It's going to happen. Don't just try one journal, try 2, 3, 4, 5 journals. Nothing wrong with that, but not at the same time. Yeah, definitely don't send the article to 3 or 4 journals, because we all talk, all the journals talk. So if you sent one to the Asian FL Journal and one to the Journal of Tesselasia, a different company, they tell us. And so then you're in trouble. But I mean, if one journal rejects you, see why they rejected you, upgrade your paper and send it to another journal. Don't give up. I think that's the best I can say to you.
That's really, really interesting and encouraging. So we have listened to the editor, so we are more than halfway, I assume. So
definitely, yeah.
Dr. Well, thank you very much for your insight and your rich experiences for us. That's the end of the session for you. But however, we will continue with the next keynote speaker. But beforehand, I will hand over the session to the MC.
Okay. Thanks, Linda. Thanks, everybody.